Be here. My goodness. The last time I was in San Francisco, some years ago, giving a paper at the American Academy of Religion, and it was about this time of day, on the second or third day of the conference. Everyone's feeling a little drowsy, maybe from lunch, and an older professor came to the podium and had a stack of notes like this, and he put it down. He had glasses, and he was taking them on and off, saying, "Where to begin? Where to begin?" And a lone voice cried out from the back of the room, "As close to the end as possible." So I'll do my best today. Pope St. John Paul II visited a parish in Rome in November 1999. And there he had a brief but significant exchange with a child who was attending the event. A young girl asked him, "Holy Father, are there any aliens?" Now the saint did not respond. "No, that is contrary to the Catholic faith." He did not say, "We don't know," or even if they exist then. Instead, he replied to the girl simply, "Always remember, they are children of God as we are." I embrace that sentiment wholeheartedly. The Soul Foundation, as we know, seeks to be a center for UAP research, especially with regard to that subject's implications for the future of humanities institutions and endeavors, and among the fields to be examined is religion. I'm so grateful then to the symposium organizers to have been invited here to say a few words about the implications of UAP for a religious tradition and institution that numbers an estimated 1.3 billion adherents. And I mean, of course, the Catholic Church. Surely such a large and ancient institution could have an enormous influence on how not only its own members, but also followers of other faiths might respond to the development of our understanding of UAP. So today I'd like to offer for your consideration a perspective on UAP and non-human intelligence based on insights from Catholic history and Catholic theology. First, a few words about where I'm coming from. My interest in UFOs began more than 60 years ago when I was an elementary school child. I was reading Project Blue Book reports and all kinds of things. I became an atheist at the age of 12, became a Christian again at 18. Finally, after earning 3 degrees in theology and religious studies at Yale and Emory universities, I became Catholic 30 years ago, and that church has been my spiritual home ever since. When I view the topic of UAP and NAH, then, not surprisingly, I see it through the lens of my Catholic faith. And in viewing this particular topic, I found that lens to be refreshing and consoling, but also surprising, and even you might say adventurous, because of all the possibilities that it opens up. I wrote this book 2 years ago entitled Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith: Are We Alone in the Universe with God and the Angels? That subtitle is important. The Catholic tradition has always affirmed the existence of at least one variety of NHI, the angels, both the fallen ones, the good ones, and the evil ones. So in the book and in today's thoughts, when I speak of NHI, I'm going to refer specifically to non-human, specifically non-angelic intelligence, because we take the angels and demons for granted. Their existence is for us a given. And I've written books about that as well. I should also note that the focus of this book is on ETI, because much of the public conversation when I was writing it was focused on ETI. And in an appendix about UAP, I noted speculations that they might represent something other than extraterrestrial creatures, with some insights about that possibility as well from the Catholic tradition. Since the publication of the book, of course, as you all know, the increasingly common use of the term NHI instead of ETI reflects a corresponding shift in the public conversation toward broader possibilities. So if I should ever have the opportunity for a new edition of the book, that shift would be reflected in that edition as well. The thesis of the book is simple. I argue that the Christian faith, as traditionally held by the Catholic Church, would not be undermined by the publicly confirmed discovery or disclosure or encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence, or I would add now, other forms of non-human, non-angelic intelligence. Such new information would, of course, raise questions about how best to interpret certain biblical passages and church doctrines and how we might relate wisely to the NHI we would discover. But I conclude that the new scientific knowledge of this sort could be accommodated with integrity within the broad doctrinal and devotional framework of this ancient faith. For this reason, then, I'm confident that whatever the reality may turn out to be, the Catholic Church can embrace the truth, and the Catholic faith itself will serve to illuminate and interpret what science or experience will reveal to us. It seems to me that for religious believers to assimilate what they may learn from about UAP and NHI, they need someone from within their own tradition to show how that new knowledge might fit into a traditional framework. That's why I wrote the book. As Peter mentioned, I'm now a retired professor of religious studies and theology. My specific field of theology is called historical theology. That means my approach to theological issues includes a survey of the history of the theological conversation about the matter. It's basically intellectual history in a church setting, looking for insights from earlier cultures and thinkers and how the topic has developed through the centuries. This approach is especially well fitted to Catholic theology because tradition, which literally means that which has been handed down, plays an immense role in Catholic self-understanding. For this reason, the book divides naturally into two parts. The first part is an historical survey of the notion of extraterrestrial intelligence in Catholic and then more broadly Christian thought. The second is a theological analysis of the issues in light of that history and some of its implications for Christian belief. Now, I had originally planned to stop there, but my publisher and editor a couple of years ago both insisted that my readers would want to know my thoughts as well about the more focused subject and related subject of UAP, even though that was not the primary concern of the book. So I wrote a 6,000-word appendix at the end that focuses on UAP, and I'm glad I did, even though that's the part of the book that has got me into the most trouble with some of my readers. It's ironic. I consider myself a rather traditional Catholic, and the primary intended audience for many of the books and articles I've written over the past 30 years are also more traditional Catholics. Yet a few of my readers are now condemning this book as contrary to Catholic tradition. Well, the irony is that I'm actually drawing deeply from the tradition to make a place for such a discovery. Certain important aspects of the tradition that I'm trying to recover have been largely forgotten or eclipsed, and they need to be recalled. Someone recently said to me, "Paul, you spend so much time on this topic. Has it become an obsession?" And I replied immediately, "No, not an obsession. It feels more like a mission of discovery, to explore, to encounter, to share what I find, to invite others to join me on the path to the discovery, to boldly go where no man has ever gone before." Nah, that was another man's mission. In fact, what I've learned as an historical theologian, and a theologian who roots his analysis in Christian intellectual history, is that I'm not in new territory at all. These matters have been debated and these possibilities have been raised for many centuries now by some of the best and best known minds in Christian history. Not just theologians and church leaders, but also philosophers, scientists, scholars in other fields, literary figures, political leaders, mystics, and even canonized saints. Now, in offering a Catholic perspective, I set out from a reality that is, I think, essential and foundation to understanding a Catholic vision of the cosmos and its possibilities, a reality that touches on every other aspect of that vision. That vision may seem a little alien to some of you, to use the word, and that's okay. But if you will, just walk with me for a minute, and I want to lay out kind of the foundation of what I see as a Catholic vision of the cosmos, the most important key to all the rest. It's this: that a self-existent, infinite, eternal, unchanging, all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing God has created out of nothing all things that exist and sustains all things that exist and governs all things that exist. The cosmos reflects to a certain extent the wisdom and power and even beauty of the God who crafted it, as handwork usually does. But he is not a part of the cosmos, nor simply is it a part of him. He is the creator, and it is the creation. He's transcendent over his creation, and yet at the same time, he is immanent as well, utterly close to his creation, close to every person, every quantum, every galaxy. This God is not an impersonal energy like the Force in Star Wars. He is personal. He is all-loving. He is in himself love, a trinity of persons who have existed in a community of perfect love from before all time. He has created human beings as creatures with one nature possessing two aspects, a material body that is now subject to death, and an immaterial spirit that is immortal. He has created these human beings in his own image, as persons with a rational intellect and a free will, who can know him and love him in return, who can know and love others as well. Keep walking with me just another minute. He knows everything about each one of us. He even has, as Jesus once said, the hairs of our head counted. In my case, he ran out of hairs to count a long time ago. But his desire for us is that we would choose to live with him in perfect joy forever, after we leave this world as we know it and enter into eternity with him. Now, if that's the starting place for Catholics, some of us, in our vision of the cosmos, John Paul's brief answer to that little girl's question makes perfect sense. Are there any aliens? Always remember, they are children of God, as we are. Every form of life that exists throughout the universe, intelligent and otherwise, every species that we will ever discover and encounter is not just a being or an entity, it is a creature. It is created by God, sustained by God, governed by God, known and loved by God. Even so, our present knowledge of God is limited and even flawed because our species has become fallen, broken, and that lamentable condition has dimmed and distorted our sight. We need healing. We need restoration and elevation. Nevertheless, this God loves everything that he has made, even when it has fallen, even when it is broken, as we human beings are on this planet. The Catholic writer G.K. Chesterton once quipped that the one Catholic doctrine that's confirmed every day in the news headlines is the doctrine of original sin. Seems we can't get away from it. And that seems to be, sadly, today as much the case as it ever has been. But there's great hope and consolation. This God has loved us so much that he's revealed himself to us. He himself has entered his creation, visited this tiny, messy blue speck in the cosmos by becoming one of us, to save us from ourselves, to heal us and recreate us, and to conquer death. That God-man for Catholics is Jesus Christ. And if we can embrace the truth about who we are and how desperately we need healing, embrace it not only with our minds, but with our hearts and our whole lives, then the truth will truly set us free. So for me, that's the heart. That's the foundation of the Catholic vision of the cosmos. It tells us certain essentials about who God is, what the cosmos is, who we are, and what we can be. But it also sets precedents and opens up possibilities for the kinds of non-human intelligence that we might encounter through our serious study of UAP. My book surveys many of those possibilities. Now, I should note that there are Catholics who would challenge my position, most of whom simply deny altogether that NHI, other than angels, can exist. They insist that the Catholic Church rejects such a possibility. Some of their objections merit rather simple responses. For example, one common objection is that the Bible never mentions or explicitly references NHI other than angels. And I answer, of course, that the Bible never references microbes or molecules or dinosaurs or duck-billed platypi, however you say that. Yeah, we know that these things really exist. So the scripture has not been given to us as an exhaustive catalog of everything that is. Now, that's just one of the more simple responses to objections, but others involve a rather complex hermeneutical and theological analysis of the scripture and certain official doctrinal statements of the church. This is obviously not the time or place to talk of those, but if you would like to look further, the details are in the book. In addition to such arguments, I cite in the historical part the supporting teachings of various theologians and saints who've been highly regarded in the Catholic tradition. The existence of NHI is, of course, not proven by what they say, but it does demonstrate to contemporary Catholics that multiple historical figures who were recognized as holy and wise and faithful to the Catholic tradition either thought that NHI is possible or even insisted that it does exist. And we're talking about something beyond angels. These figures stretch across multiple centuries and cultures. Just a few of them are St. Augustine, the great African theologian of the ancient church. St. Jerome, known as the 4th century father of biblical scholarship. The 19th century German mystic, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, who had visions of ETI. The 20th century Italian Capuchin friar, St. Pio of Pietrelcino, known and beloved by millions as Padre Pio. And judging from his reply to that young girl, St. John Paul II as well. We should note that the fascinating history of NHI in this conversation in Christian circles reveals that medieval cosmologists tended to take for granted much of the cosmology of Aristotle. He was the ancient Greek, of course, pre-Christian philosopher, and he taught that the earth is the center of the cosmos, and the sun and moon and stars move around it. The planets, as they call them, earned that special name because the word means literally wanderers, and they were considered stars that somehow wandered from the path of the other fixed stars that moved together across the sky. So there was no room in this cosmology for rocky balls other than the earth itself, which living beings could inhabit. Now, assuming this pre-Christian theology, debates about ETI in particular in those early centuries up until this medieval times were quite limited. ETI had no place to live except perhaps the moon. But even Aristotle and Plato as well had posited that the stars themselves could be intelligent, animate beings, physical bodies moved by souls. So we could say that despite his cosmology, in that sense, even Aristotle allowed for a certain kind of ETI. The great medieval Catholic theologian and philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas adopted and adapted much of Aristotle's cosmology, and he noted as well the idea of animated stars. So he too affirmed the possibility of a kind of non-human intelligence other than angels. That once the Aristotelian cosmos was found to be wanting, and not really a part inherently of Catholic teaching, then Catholic and other Christian theologians began to hammer out their various positions on ETI in particular. That barrier was no longer there. Among them was Nicholas of Cusa, a 15th century German theologian, philosopher, and astronomer. There were lots of Catholic astronomers, and there still are at the Vatican observatories, most of them Jesuits. He insisted that the earth was not the center of the universe, and this was some time before the declarations of Copernicus in that regard. He insisted that there are other planets like Earth and that celestial bodies could be inhabited. He even speculated about the nature of their intelligent inhabitants. Nicholas thus openly promoted ideas that in his time, a whole generation before the Copernican revolution, were considered to be quite radical in their break from the prevailing Aristotelian philosophical tradition. So how did the Catholic Church respond to such a man? Well, Nicholas of Cusa was appointed as a cardinal, a papal legate, a papal advisor, and a participant in the Ecumenical Council of Basel. These appointments all suggest that within the Catholic Church he was respected and embraced by authorities at the very highest level. To summarize then, what is the first implication of the Catholic vision as I presented here? Simply this: NHI can indeed exist, and God has created every form of NHI that does exist. He knows it, he loves it, he has a purpose for it. Then other implications arise from that one, given that foundation. If God has indeed created other forms of NHI, what are the possibilities for what we might call their spiritual status? That is, are they too made in God's image? What is their knowledge of God and their response to him? What kind of ultimate destiny, or destinies, plural, does he offer them? And if there are a variety of forms of NHI, those questions may have varying answers according to the species. Which leads immediately to another implication. What is their moral status? Are they fallen, broken as we are? The fact that they're all God's children doesn't guarantee that they will all be friendly. Some could be hostile or exploitative. After all human beings are God's children too, but just look around at how we're treating each other. We're fallen, we're broken, and they may be fallen too. I should note here that some of my book's Catholic critics feel certain that UAP across the board represents fallen NHI, specifically fallen angels, or what we would call demons. I do agree that certain UAP encounters demonstrate parallels to traditional accounts of diabolical activity. So some aspects of the phenomena that we're observing may well be demonic. I think, for example, of the apparently malevolent hitchhiker phenomenon associated with Skinwalker Ranch. Maybe it's the same thing. But most of what we encounter in UAP studies, I don't have to tell you, doesn't fit that profile. Instead, I think it's more likely, as many observers think, that we're dealing with a variety of NHI, some of which may have no direct relationship to the others. Another possibility, could a species of non-human, non-angelic intelligence be unfallen, never having descended into the disorder and darkness that our species knows all too well? Are some species one way and some the other? Could there be a species that has a mixed moral status, as the angels do, with some of them fallen and some of them unfallen? If they are fallen, would God's activity in human history to offer salvation through Jesus Christ somehow have consequences or open up possibilities for other species in a kind of ripple effect? Or might God have an altogether different plan for saving other alien species if they need salvation? Might God even have taken on their nature as well as ours and become one of them in order to heal them as he has done for us? Might he do that even for an unfallen race, simply in order to draw near to them in friendship? Such possibilities have been debated by centuries among Christians. The possibilities go on, and starting with a simple acknowledgement of their existence as viewed from the perspective of the Catholic tradition. And in light of the precedents we can already see in the existence of humankind and the angels, I survey many of these possibilities in my book, beginning with Catholic and other Christian figures throughout history who've taken one position or another. Now, in this light, I think we can see how questions about how Catholics would interact with aliens if we discovered them or encountered them can only be answered once we actually have the experience. So I think, for instance, a question I often get is, would you baptize an alien? So my answer is, as with most hypothetical questions, so much depends on the specifics of the hypothesis. So let's say, for example, we were living a real-life version of the movie Signs, where you have aliens that are invading and are hostile and die upon contact with water. In that case, I'd say, yes, baptize them all right away. So I do express my opinions there about, in the book, which of these possibilities seem more likely to me than others. So, for example, contrary to some writers who think that the brokenness of sin is inevitable in every intelligent species, I have the hope that a species might actually exist that has never fallen as we have. And what can we learn from them? Oh, my goodness. And I'm in good company in that regard. The celebrated 20th century saint I just mentioned, Padre Pio, the Capuchin friar, said emphatically, "The Lord did not limit his glory to this small earth. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we have." Now, given that Padre Pio was famous for his God-given ability to know things that are normally unknowable for the rest of us, we could do a whole lecture on that, we cannot so easily dismiss his claim about ETI. Even though I think some possibilities for NHS are less probable than others, I still allow for them. The very few possibilities I would rule out altogether. One would be the claim that there are intelligent species that God did not create, that he does not sustain or know or love or govern. Now, the faith of the Catholic Church leaves considerable room for mystery and for discovery. But its fundamental framework is not vague. It has a certain distinct, sharp, vivid, firm contour within which the mystery unfolds. Some may think that such solidity makes the Catholic faith fragile, something that would shatter like a glass vessel, if it were forced to expand to accommodate newly discovered realities, such as NHI. But as I've suggested, history seems to prove otherwise. The Catholic faith showed itself capable of accommodating, for example, the Copernican revolution, as we said, when it realized that certain common but flawed assumptions about cosmology had actually been borrowed from the pre-Christian philosopher Aristotle. They weren't an essential part of the Catholic faith. Even so, that truth had to be carefully discovered, discerned, and uncovered, a process that required a recovery of elements of the Christian tradition that had been forgotten or obscured. And I believe that we have a similar situation today. You see, the firmness of the Catholic faith doesn't make it a fragile vessel. It's more like a tree with firm contours that give it a solid and distinctive shape, yet also with considerable room for growth. It's like a mighty oak tree that began as an acorn and has grown over the centuries by interacting with the surrounding landscape to deepen its roots, to spread out its branches, a process that continues today. The reality of this tree's DNA, as you might call it, is present with it from the beginning, and it still manifests itself in new ways today that are newly grown, yet keeping with its original unchanging genetic composition. Even if the massive oak looks quite different from the tiny acorn, it's the same organism, the phenotype more completely expressing the genotype. My study of this matter has been long and labored, and I need to finish soon. But I'm now convinced that this great tree of the Catholic and the wider Christian faith has within its DNA the potential to draw from a compelling confirmation of non-human intelligence a new vitality, growing new branches and new roots that expand and extend its distinctive shape while remaining essentially the same organization it's always been. But to do so, Catholics must recover these certain elements. At the same time, I think we've had to a degree a failure of imagination. What we need is an imagination that is more worthy of delving into the complexity and the grandeur, the riches and the surprises of this awesome reality that we inhabit, given to us by a loving God to be our transitory dwelling place. This glorious cosmos stretching out from quanta to galaxies and everything in between and everything beyond. And in addition, just to get past the issue of whichever NHI is possible, more Catholics and other Christians need to do a deep dive into the journalistic and historical and scientific research into UAP, as we've been looking at today, that's been achieved over the years is rapidly expanding. We need to discern carefully, of course, but so many critics simply suffer from a lack of awareness of the compelling evidence that does exist. Above all, I'll end with this, I believe it's time for Catholics and other Christians to turn again to the God of the book of Job in the Bible, who thunders out of the whirlwind in reply to Job's presumptuous musings. "Where were you," he asked, "when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Can you bind the chain of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens?" We must admit, we don't. We can't. We know oh so little of what God has done and appointed for the universe. The creator of the cosmos holds more mysteries in his hands than we can ever fathom. And at the present, we are merely, as Job says in the same account, we're just touching, he says, the outskirts of God's ways. In short, we need to recover our sense of wonder, which I like to define as humility in the face of mystery. Humility in the face of mystery. Finally, scientists have done so much to help Christians deepen and broaden and enrich our vision of the cosmos. We're grateful, and we feel obliged to return the favor. The strictly materialist vision of reality that has been tried and found wanting, because there are realms of reality that cannot be understood exclusively in terms of matter and energy, and even the story, the history, so to speak, of the matter and energy that we do understand has itself spiritual dimensions that must be accounted for if we're to discover not just the what and when and where and how of the cosmos, but the all-important why. I've got to end. I'll leave you one whimsical image to ponder. In the biblical book of Revelation, St. John envisions, he says, every creature in heaven and on earth, praising God in the exquisite joy of his eternal presence. We know that humans and angels are there. Might some ETI and other NHI be included in that vision? Well, Jesus once said, "In my Father's house are many rooms," speaking of heaven. Perhaps one day we might just enter the gates of heaven and find to our surprise and delight that in some of those many rooms, there are those who might look something like the crowd of creatures in the Tatooine Cantina in Star Wars. What a glorious occasion for celebration that would be. Thank you, and God bless you.